How does it feel being the most useless person here? That's what my sister asked me, in front of my entire family. So I stood up, looked her in the eye, and said one thing that made the whole table go silent. They had no idea the storm I was about to unleash. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or pushed aside, you're going to feel this story in your bones. Hit like, subscribe, and comment below if you've ever wanted to stand up for yourself, because this time, I did. The garden glowed with string lights and candle flames. A jazz trio played by the fountain. The table was draped in white linen and silverware, so polished it looked untouchable. It was my parents' 40th anniversary, and everything looked perfect until Sylvie opened her mouth. She always had a story. That night, it was about how a model wore one of her boutique silk wraps on Instagram, how a magazine wrote about her store, how she had dinner with a local artist. Her voice carried like champagne bubbles, light, sharp, impossible to tune out. I sat at the far end of the table, close enough to refill the wine, far enough to be forgotten, and when dessert came, she made sure I was seen, but not in the way anyone wants. "How does it feel?" Sylvie said, smiling into her wine glass. "Being the most useless one here?" A few people chuckled, the kind of laugh that sticks to your skin like syrup. My dad let out a deep chuckle. My mother smiled that closed-mouth smile she wore whenever she wanted to seem above it all, but never objected. I didn't flinch. I didn't lower my eyes or fake a laugh. I just placed my hands on the table, calmly, and said, "How does it feel, knowing the useless one won't be paying your bills anymore?" Forks froze midair. Someone coughed. Sylvie's smile cracked like thin ice. I stood up. No one moved. No one stopped me. I walked through the garden gate, past the candles, past the silver, past the family that never saw me, and into the dark. What they didn't know was that their entire world was about to shift, and I was finally going to make them see me. They always saw Sylvie. Her laugh echoed through the house. Her wins were celebrated with champagne, framed diplomas, and brand new convertibles. Me? I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the helper in the background. They never had to ask, because I always anticipated what they needed before they even noticed the cracks forming. I was 14 when I first heard my mother whispering through the kitchen door, panic slicing through her words. My dad had lost a major client. The mortgage was overdue. I remember the walls humming with silence, like they were waiting for something to collapse. That weekend, I counted every single dollar I'd saved from my job at Bellamy Books. I'd been shelving paperbacks for $7 an hour, $800. It was everything I had. I slipped the envelope onto my dad's desk. He never said thank you. He just called me reliable, like I was a household appliance that happened to bleed. The next month, Sylvie got a red convertible for her 18th birthday. Custom plates, white leather seats. I watched her squeal with joy in the driveway as my parents beamed beside her, their pride radiating like a lighthouse. No one mentioned the envelope. No one remembered. By 17, I was taking extra shifts at a downtown cafe, covering for college kids who needed weekends off. When my dad needed new drafting tools, I gave him $500 from my savings. He laughed and told my mom I was a walking trust fund. I smiled back, but something inside me fractured. At 19, I got into a study abroad program in Florence, art history. It was the first time I'd wanted something just for myself. I reread the acceptance letter until the words blurred in my lap. Then came the call Sylvie was behind on tuition again. Her part-time gallery job wasn't enough. Her rent was too high. My dad pulled me into his office. "Family helps family, Karen," he said, his tone already closing the door on any response. I didn't argue. I never did. I just wired the $5,000 I had saved for Italy into an account linked to Sylvie's school. She graduated with honors, her portfolio hanging on my parents' wall like a shrine. I graduated from a state school. At night, while working 2 jobs. I didn't complain, but I began to wonder what it would take for them to really see me. And one day, I found out. It was a Tuesday night, late, the kind of quiet where even the city seems to hold its breath. I had just brewed a cup of tea and was halfway through a worn novel when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Sylvie. I let it ring twice, then answered. Karen. Hey. Her voice was syrupy sweet, like we were old friends catching up over brunch. I didn't respond. I waited. I'd learned silence made people speak faster. So, the boutique's doing great. Really it is, but there's a space next door. Perfect for expansion. The bank offered a line of credit. They just need a co-signer. Her voice was casual, like she was asking for a ride to the airport, not $75,000. You're good with money, she continued. No kids, no mortgage. You're just sitting in that little apartment writing grants all day. It's not like you're curing cancer. My heart slowed, but my chest felt tight, like my ribs were bracing for impact. I set the book down carefully. 75,000 isn't nothing, Sylvie. She laughed, lightly, like I was being dramatic. And that's when I said it. Number. Silence stretched between us, like a live wire. No. As in you won't help me? No. As in, I won't co-sign another loan for someone who's never paid me back a cent. The mask slipped. Her voice turned sharp. You're being selfish. That word, selfish, landed like a slap after all the years I'd poured into her dreams. The sleepless nights, the paychecks rerouted, the sacrifices made so she could wear designer labels and smile on magazine covers. Selfish. I didn't argue. I hung up, but something had shifted. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened my laptop. I scrolled through folders until I found the one labeled quietly, almost unconsciously, years ago. Records. Inside, scanned receipts, wire confirmations, tax returns, tuition payments, every dime I had ever handed over, every lie I'd swallowed, every time I had paid the cost of keeping them comfortable. At the very bottom was the contract, notarized, March 2015, a 51% ownership stake in Juniper and Silk, signed by Sylvie. She had been crying the night she signed it, begging me to save her boutique. She never remembered what she gave me, but I never forgot. And now, neither would they. The night of my parents' 40th anniversary had all the trappings of elegance: white linens, flickering candles, antique silver, and a jazz trio playing soft notes near the garden fountain. The air smelled like magnolia and expectation. I sat at the far end of the table, same spot as always, close enough to refill the wine, far enough to be forgotten. Sylvie was glowing. She had the spotlight. Again, stories of her boutique being featured in a magazine, a model wearing one of her silk wraps on Instagram. Everyone applauded like she had just returned from war. My dad beamed with pride. My mother's smile looked pulled tight, like it had been sewn in place. And then came dessert. Peach tart, plated perfectly. Sylvie leaned forward, her wine glass hovering in midair like a dagger. How does it feel? She asked, loud enough for the whole table to hear, being the most useless one here. Laughter rippled. It wasn't loud. That would have made it obvious. It was soft, sticky, complicit, like spilled champagne. My father chuckled without flinching. My mother gave one of those tight, closed-mouth smiles, the kind she used when she didn't want to seem cruel, but wouldn't lift a finger to stop it either. Even Sylvie's husband smirked, as if he'd heard that line before. They expected me to laugh it off, to shrink. Instead, I looked straight at Sylvie. My voice didn't rise, but it cut through the air like a snapping cello string. How does it feel? I said calmly, knowing the useless one won't be paying your bills anymore. And just like that, the night cracked. Forks froze. Someone coughed. Sylvie's smirk collapsed. I stood up slowly, the scrape of my chair slicing through the garden's silence. I turned toward the gate and walked. Not a single person called after me. My heels clicked against the cobblestone as I stepped out of their perfectly curated garden dream and into my own freedom. They didn't know it yet, but everything had already begun to change. The next morning, the light in my apartment felt different, colder, but clearer, like something had finally snapped into focus. I sat at my kitchen counter, phone in hand, staring at the automatic transfer on my banking app. Every month, like clockwork, $2,500 disappeared from my savings straight into Sylvie's boutique account. It had started quietly, back when she was barely making enough to cover her utilities. She never asked. I never told. She just assumed the storm had passed. I tapped the screen. A prompt appeared. "Are you sure you want to cancel this transaction?" I hovered. Then, I pressed yes. Just like that, the machine stopped. By the end of the week, the fallout arrived like a slow-motion car crash. First came the texts. Rent bounced. "You late on something?" "Suppliers are freaking out. Why aren't you answering?" I didn't reply. I didn't owe answers anymore. The calls came next, then the voicemails, each one more frantic than the last. Sylvie's voice, once sugar-slicked and smug, now sounded sharp and cracking. By Friday night, I stopped checking my phone altogether. Then, Saturday morning, the buzzer rang. I didn't even flinch. I already knew whose voice would be waiting. "Karen," Sylvie snapped through the intercom. "Open the door." My father's voice followed, low and commanding. "We just need to talk." I buzzed them in. They walked in like they still owned the place. Sylvie stormed to the living room, arms folded, jaw tight. My father followed slower, scanning my apartment like it offended him. "You cut me off," Sylvie said. "The boutique is falling apart. Rent, payroll, everything's collapsing." "I did," I replied, calm, "and I won't be restarting it." "You don't get to just decide that," she snapped. "I've been deciding for years," I said, walking to the side table. "You just never noticed." I pulled out the leather folder, the one labeled Records, laid it flat on the coffee table, and opened it. Pages of proof, receipts, emails, wire transfers, all signed by me, all tracking the lifeblood of her boutique back to my accounts. The notarized contract sat neatly at the bottom. My name, my ownership. Sylvie's face drained of color. My father leaned over her shoulder, eyes narrowing. "This isn't how family works," he said coldly. "We don't keep score." "No," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You just don't like when the math is out loud." Sylvie stared at the folder like it was a stranger. Her hands hovered, trembling slightly as she flipped through the documents. Her boutique's survival, line by line, traced back to me, silent deposits, emergency wires, vendor settlements, my name stamped over every lifeline she'd ever needed. She looked up, eyes wide, mouth partially open, as if a response was forming, but never came. My father stepped between us, his voice sharpening like a knife. "You'll reinstate the payments. This ends now. We can't afford this chaos. Karen, you have the means. You will help your sister." He spoke like I was 14 again, like none of this had happened, like the last decade had never carved lines into my face or drained the marrow from my bones. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. "I already have," I said. "I helped when Sylvie called me, sobbing every night, terrified the boutique was finished, when payroll bounced, when vendors threatened lawsuits. I liquidated everything, my portfolio, my safety net, $60,000, gone." My father blinked. Sylvie flinched like I'd slapped her. "You never told me that," she hissed. "You didn't say anything." "You didn't ask," I replied. She turned to our father, eyes wild. "I thought it was a short-term loan." I nodded toward the contract. "You signed it. You were desperate. I saved your business. and then disappeared, so you could pretend it was all you." She clenched her jaw. "You didn't have to humiliate me. You humiliated yourself the second you called me useless." My father's voice boomed. "This isn't about feelings. This is about family, unity, keeping us together." "Number," I said, stepping forward. "This is about power. You mocked the person who's been keeping the lights on for 10 years. You called me selfish when I finally stopped letting you drain me dry." Sylvie's voice cracked. "So this is revenge then? A play for control?" I shook my head. "This isn't revenge. This is reclamation. For years, I kept you afloat and let you act like I didn't exist. I let you treat me like a utility with a pulse, like I owed you the air you breathed. But I don't. Not anymore." My father's face hardened. "You're tearing this family apart." I looked him straight in the eye. "I've been holding it together. You just noticed me the first time I said no." Sylvie clutched the folder to her chest, pale and shaking. She didn't say a word. Neither did he. I didn't see them to the door. I didn't apologize. I just closed it gently and stood there, hand still on the knob. My voice had finally landed, and I knew exactly where it would echo next. It arrived in silence, a thick manila envelope in my mailbox on a rainy Thursday morning, its weight deliberate, like it already knew what it carried. I stood in my apartment doorway, keys still in hand, heart already bracing. I didn't have to open it to know who it was from. Inside, a lawsuit. Sylvie was suing me. She claimed I'd coerced her, that I manipulated her into signing over the boutique while she was emotionally vulnerable. Words like undue influence and breach of trust echoed across the pages, as if the last decade of sacrifice had been part of some grand scheme, instead of her survival plan. I didn't panic. I called Laura, the friend who never asked for anything but always knew what to do. She gave me a name, Margot Shaw, lawyer, razor sharp, no time for theatrics. I met Margot that afternoon. She read every page with practiced precision, then set the final document down, looked at me calmly and said, "This isn't a lawsuit, it's a warning shot. And it won't land." The hearing came fast. Sylvie arrived polished and unshaken, lips pressed into a perfect line. My father flanked her, arms crossed, jaw clenched, as if bracing for battle. They didn't look at me. Her lawyer spun a story that I had preyed on her desperation, exploited her tears to take control. He painted me as cold, calculated, a business-suited snake hiding behind receipts and signatures. Then Margot stood. No theatrics, no venom, just facts. $60,000 wired from my personal account. Lease payments, payroll, vendor debts cleared, a signed notarized contract, emails thanking me, receipts dated, logged, archived. "This wasn't exploitation," Margot said. "It was survival, and my client made it possible." The judge didn't blink. Motion to dismiss granted. Just like that. Outside, the sun was warm, like the universe had waited for this moment. Margot smiled. "You're free now." But as I walked to my car, heels clicking on the sidewalk, I realized something quieter had ended, too. Not just the case, but the part of me that still wanted them to care. I waited for a call, a text, an apology wrapped in silence. Nothing came. No vague holiday card from my mother, no email about reconciliation, not even the performative guilt Sylvie was once so good at faking. For the first time in my adult life, I was invisible to them. And instead of pain, I felt air. The kind of air you breathe after surfacing from too deep underwater. The kind that tastes like your own life. There's a certain silence that follows a storm, not hollow, but clean. With the lawsuit dismissed, and my name finally spoken in truth, the noise stopped. No more texts, no missed calls, no false concern wrapped in manipulation, just absence. And for once, I welcomed it. I returned to something I hadn't touched in years, the easel in the corner of my apartment. It was still draped in the same cloth I'd placed over it the night Sylvie first called me crying about payroll. I pulled it off. The smell of old acrylics and raw wood filled the room. I didn't have a plan. I didn't need one. I just painted. Landscapes, unfinished portraits, layers of red smeared over green, like anger buried under politeness. It didn't matter if it was good. It mattered that it was mine. For the first time in my life, my hands moved for me, not to sign someone else's loan, not to write a check that would never be acknowledged, but to create something that asked for nothing in return. And then came the email. I almost deleted it. The subject line was vague. Women's Conference Inquiry. It was from a woman I'd met years ago while helping with a nonprofit grant. She remembered me, my patience, my ability to carry weight without flinching. She was now organizing a regional leadership conference. The theme? Resilience. Rebuilding without permission. She wanted a speaker. Someone who understood boundaries and sacrifice. Someone who had walked away from something that once defined them. She wanted me. I sat with the invitation for 2 days. Years ago, I would have forwarded it to Sylvie, told her it was more her lane. She was always the visible one, the charming one, the voice in the room. But she didn't own this story. I did. So I replied, "Yes, I'll do it." And just like that, something shifted. My voice, the one I'd buried under obligation, under spreadsheets, under silence, began to rise. Not to shout, not to scream, but to speak. Clear, steady, unapologetic. I wasn't just painting anymore. I was reclaiming the space I'd once disappeared from. The ballroom wasn't enormous, but it felt vast. Rows of folding chairs filled with women, some in sleek blazers, others in cardigans worn at the elbows, and many with tired eyes that had seen too much and spoken too little. A soft murmur moved through the room like a tide waiting to turn. I stepped behind the podium. No notes, no script, just my voice, and a lifetime spent being quiet. The lights weren't harsh, but I could still feel them, like a gentle pressure, reminding me I was finally being seen, not as a helper, or a planner, or a walking safety net, just seen. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then I spoke. For most of my life, I believed value came from what you could carry for other people. Their burdens, their dreams, their emergency. I was the invisible beam holding everything together. The quiet deposit when rent was late. The emergency loan that no one called a loan. The solution they never thanked, only expected. I paused, scanned the faces in the front row. One woman's hands were clenched in her lap, white-knuckled. I told them about the boutique, the years of silent giving, the dinner where my sister called me useless, and I said the one thing no one expected, the truth. I told them how I had documents, receipts, a notarized contract that proved I didn't imagine the weight I'd carried. I told them how I finally stopped, and how the silence that followed wasn't loneliness, it was peace. This wasn't revenge, I said softly. It wasn't even about justice. It was about weight, and how good it feels to finally set it down. When I finished, the room didn't erupt. There was no standing ovation, no performance applause, but a woman in the front row wiped her cheek. Another stood slowly, like she was unfolding a truth inside herself. And then came the applause, quiet, honest, real. Afterwards, they came to me, not with flattery, but with stories about mothers, sisters, partners, about being the one who never said no, until they finally did. That night, I walked home with paint still on my hands from the canvas I'd touched that morning. And I knew, I didn't become famous, I didn't become rich, but I became free. My birthday came on a Tuesday. Quiet, unceremonious. I took the day off, wandered through the cobblestone streets near the waterfront, bought myself a slice of lemon cake from a little bakery that didn't ask questions. No one called. Not from the family, at least. The sun slipped low behind the Spanish moss as I walked home. The the breeze warm, sweet with sea air and late summer. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. 7 words. Thinking of you. I miss my girl. It was from my mother. I stopped walking and stared at the screen. Her message hovered like a hand halfway extended. Not quite an apology, not exactly acknowledgement. Maybe regret, maybe nostalgia, maybe nothing. Years ago, that message would have cracked something inside me. I would have seen it as a lifeline. I would have softened. Not now. Now, I simply put the phone back in my pocket and kept walking. I passed the bookstore where I'd shelved paperbacks at 14, the one that smelled like old paper and lemon polish. The light inside was warm. I caught a glimpse of a girl behind the counter, straightening a stack of books with quiet precision. For a second, I saw myself again. But she wasn't me anymore. I kept walking past the schoolhouse with its faded mural, past the porch of a home I once dreamed of belonging to, past the places where I had once stood still for too long, waiting to be invited in. The silence that followed me now wasn't hollow. It was earned. It wasn't absence. It was space. Space I had made for myself. The next day, I repainted. My brush moved, with no plan, no deadline, just color on canvas, red over green, light over dark. It wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't a gift. It was mine. For the first time, I wasn't rescuing anyone, not from debt, not from failure, not from themselves. And I didn't need to be thanked, because I had finally stopped asking for a seat at a table that never saved one for me. I built my own, and I sat at the head of it. The last word was mine. Now it's your turn. What did you think of this story? Have you ever had to reclaim your voice like she did? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know. Your voice might be the one that changes everything.